that we on target here from a timeline standpoint. And so welcome everyone to the March 14th, 2025 Colorado Produced Water Consortium meeting. Appreciate everyone taking time out of their day to have a relatively quick meeting as far as it relates to our typical meeting times. And so lots has been happening since the last time we met, and we'll go through some of that during the meeting today. Quick overview of the agenda is Hope's going to give us some announcements and housekeeping. I'll give an update on the ECMC produced water rulemaking. We've got some folks that are interested in providing public comment on the first draft of deliverable 9. Dr. Aaron Sidlako will provide a presentation on that first draft of deliverable 9, which is identifying toxicological and analytical methods. This was a deliverable that was required by the consortium to work on as per HB 23-1242. And then Wendy Padilla is going to give us an update on the policy handbook for boards and commissions. AAG Davenport is going to provide us a training and just updates on our legal responsibilities as consortium members, and that will conclude the day. Want to remind folks that the presentation that'll happen on the first draft of deliverable 9 was, once again, it was directed by statute. It was a literature review of existing information that was out there to create a base of information for the consortium. And the draft was developed per direction given to Assistant Director Sidlako based on consortium feedback from the last meeting. And so excited that everyone's here. We're going to have a lot of work in front of us over the next year or so, and Hope's going to go into a little bit of that. We've got meeting dates that are starting to fall into place, and so appreciate everyone's continued engagement in the consortium. And I'll talk a little bit about the feedback we got on the work we've done up until this point during the ECMC rulemaking at that point. So with that, I am going to kick it off to Director Dalton.
Thank you, Chair Messner. So to kind of give a preview of what Chair Messner is going to say, I got some kudos from 2 ECMC commissioners. As Tricia Oath said, the consortium has done, I wrote it down wrong, so I'm probably misquoting her, but has done a lot of work to get us to the produced water rulemaking, and I really appreciate it. Commissioner Brett Ackerman said the consortium is one of the most well-run and useful stakeholder working groups I've seen. So this is great news that our regulatory bodies are listening to us and appreciating our work. So wonderful news. It is tax time. So if you haven't received your 1099 forms for any stipends that you might have received for attending consortium meetings, please reach out to me because they have been sent. Let me see. Oh, I am going to hand it over to Chloel to make a short announcement about an exciting event.
Thanks, Hope. I will make this very quick. My name is Chloel Danforth. My organization, the Health Effects Institute, is hosting a public meeting and panel discussion on April 7th in Longmont, Colorado. We funded some research that has wrapped up. The title of the research is Measuring and Modeling Air Pollution and Noise Exposure Near Unconventional Oil and Gas Development in Colorado. The research team is Jeff Collette out of the Colorado State University. I have forwarded the information to Hope, who can send around a flyer for anybody who's interested. So I just wanted to flag that it could be relevant to folks on this call. Thanks, Hope.
Thank you, Chloel, for the invitation. Now I'd like to hand it over to Michael Johnny, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your last name, for an announcement from the EPA. Michael?
Hey, Yeah, hi, I'm Michael Jane. I'm with the EPA Office of Research and Development. I'm here on behalf of Trish Pfeiffer, and I'm excited to announce that the EPA is going to be opening up a new consideration of the regulations related to produced water discharges. And so our Administrator Zeldin announced earlier this week that this is one of the things that they're going to undertake with the new administration. And some of the provisions that they're considering are expanding the list of uses that treated produced water can be used for, considering things like extraction of lithium and critical minerals, artificial intelligence and data center cooling, rangeland irrigation, fire control, power generation, as well as ecological needs. And I further say that the EPA is interested in hearing from interested parties about other types of uses that would be of interest. And so if you have any additional uses, we'd like to hear about those as well. We're also considering expanding the geographic scope beyond the Western states. And so obviously you guys are already in Western state, and so you're covered, but it will, we're going to consider whether the subpart E should be expanded to include Eastern states as well. Again, just focusing on onshore facilities, and also looking at additional flexibilities for centralized waste treatment facilities that receive produced water. I'm really trying to enable them to more effectively receive and discharge that type of wastewater. And so in terms of process, the study that our Office of Water has been working on over the last few months is expected to be released hopefully later this month. And that'll be a public document, but it'll be relatively brief and for informational purposes only. It's just kind of the background of what EPA has found so far, and kind of the background for why they want to consider revising the rule. And then there'll be the whole formal rulemaking process, which is a multi-year process, where there'll be a public announcement, and then there'll be a comprehensive EPA evaluation. During that process, we'd love to get information from different parties, including the consortium and the parties represented here. So we'll be asking for data and perspectives from all different types of folks. And so things like treatment trains, water quality, operation maintenance needs, costs and economics will all be really important information that'll be collected during that evaluation. And that'll be a formal process. And then there'll be a public comment period. And then there'll be revisions in response to the public comments, final rule, and then that'll be the end of the process. And so again, that will probably take a couple of years. We're just getting started. We still need to kick this thing off formally. But I think it's exciting for this group that there will be a revision, and certainly we look forward to working with the consortium and its members to try to make sure that evaluation is conducted comprehensively and it collects everyone's perspectives and viewpoints on this issue. So thank you.
That's wonderful news, Michael, and sounds like a big task, multi-year. So thank you for involving us. Yeah.
Thank you.
And just to confirm, Michael, if people are interested, should they reach out to Jesse Pritz? Yes. Or okay,
Jesse Pritz would be the right contact. Yep. Thank you.
If anybody needs that contact, I can let them know.
Great.
Let's see. So then, I sent out a survey about work priorities. That's planning for our next April meeting. And 8 of you have responded. I'm just trying to get a feel for how all of you think our work has matched the strategic plan, and with limited resources in the next fiscal year, where should we focus our time as staff? And so if you haven't had a chance, please complete that survey. And now, speaking of the April 4th meeting, I'm going to hand it over to James Rosenblum, who will be hosting.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Hope. So the ideal situation, April 4th, if space looks like it's sufficient, we would love to host the group at our Water Technology Hub in Northeast Denver at I-70 in Quebec in Commerce City. We have a pretty sizable conference room that I think could hold everybody, as well as TV for presentation of slides, Wi-Fi obviously, and then we do have space for breakout rooms, some smaller rooms, but then we have a 7,500 square foot kind of high bay lab that we could put tables around for breakout sessions, and then would be cool to show some of the technologies we're working on for the treatment of produced water and other various waters. at the lab. At that point, we will have our pilot back from West Texas that was down there. So we'll have a lot of, bench scale, pilot scale, and even demonstration scale toys to show the group. So I think it'd be a really cool place to host.
I've heard from many, they're very excited. So if you need to buy your plane tickets, please do so. We will be hosting our in-person meeting in Denver, April 4th. And that's all. Back to you, Chair Messner.
Thanks, Director Dalton. I'm looking forward to that April 4th meeting. I think it's an opportunity that we had talked about to kind of review some of the stuff we've been working on over the last year since we developed a strategic plan, and then reevaluate our strategic plan. Not redo the entire strategic plan, but reevaluate it and set a work plan up for ourselves for the next year or so. And I know that everyone's been thinking about things that they want to incorporate into the next steps. And so encourage people to continue thinking about that and be prepared at that April 4th meeting to share your thoughts. And also be prepared to be realistic about the timeframes and the resources we have within the consortium to accomplish everything that everyone is going to want to accomplish. But looking forward to that. I want to take a few minutes here just to update folks on the ECMC produced water rulemaking. That was concluded formally this week. And with the adoption of the rules and the statement of basis and purpose, those rules will go into effect at some point in the future, but I can't remember exactly when. But that's laid out in the statement of basis and purpose and the rules themselves. A number of folks on the consortium were participants in that rulemaking and provided their perspectives and influenced how the rules ultimately turned out. There was lots of praise that was heaped upon the consortium for the volume of work and diligence and passion that the consortium members had towards the topic, and the pragmatic recommendations that were provided to ECMC to create the base for this rulemaking. The rulemaking obviously was required by ECMC as per HB 23-1242, but was also influenced significantly by the recommendations that were provided by the consortium, and also by the numbers of reports and studies and analysis that was accomplished by the consortium over the last year to help create a data-driven decision-making process to ultimately develop the rules. Many of the recommendations that were provided by the consortium were adopted by ECMC during the rulemaking. There was some changes to some of the approaches for implementation for the reuse and recycling targets. The targets themselves were maintained as per the recommendation. There was some collaborative work that was done by a number of different parties throughout the rulemaking to look at ways to develop, rather than an OGDP by OGDP or cap by cap specific mechanism for reuse and recycling, to look at it more across an operator's portfolio within a basin with a specific timeline associated with it. And then while we had talked about it during the consortium discussions, the development of a cap and trade or a credit system, ultimately our recommendations didn't include that. But through collaborative work of the stakeholders, through the rulemaking process, there was a credit system that was proposed and then ultimately adopted by the commission as a mechanism for both being able to meet the obligations to reduce the amount of fresh water and increase the amount of reuse and recycling of produced water in oil and gas activities across the state, but also minimize potential impacts associated with reuse and recycling to the community and the environment. And I think the system that was created was creative, and the commissioners agreed to adopt that as part of the rulemaking process as well. There was a number of things that were identified as topics that needed continued work and analysis as part of the rulemaking, and the commission has requested that the consortium work on a few things as part of the rulemaking, and so I want to identify some of those. The consortium has identified, as part of the studies that we developed, some barriers associated to reuse and recycling that have of produced water, and identified those. And so the commission has asked that the consortium continue to work through these barriers and develop pragmatic recommendations for solution as our work continues for future rulemakings. The topics that they've asked us to continue to work through are really topics that we've already identified and I think intended to work on anyway, but they include storage and transportation, legal and liability issues, fit for use classifications, data improvement and verification, testing standards, community and environmental justice concerns, research gaps, and water share agreements. There's also an ask that the consortium continue to collect, refine, and analyze basin-specific data to inform conversations around basic specific considerations and targets that would ultimately result in recommendations to ECMC for a future rulemaking on the topic. And then there was a ask that we look at specifically the barrier associated with the blanket prohibition of centralized produced water treatment facilities in disproportionately impacted communities, and see if there were opportunities to look at ways to overcome that barrier to maintain and support the amount of reuse and recycling that is currently occurring in certain areas of the Western Slope, the Piceance Basin in particular. And so all of these have been asks. Only one of them had a timeline associated with it specifically, and that was the work on the prohibition of disproportionately impacted communities, or sorry, the prohibition of centralized produced water treatment facilities in disproportionately impacted communities. And the ask was that we are able to look at that and begin discussions and see if there are opportunities for solutions by September 1st. And so that is an ask that this consortium's been asked to work on in a timeline specific manner. And then the other pieces are to be determined by the consortium at our strategic planning meeting in April, as to where they fit and how they get prioritized in the work that we hope to accomplish over the next year or so. And so that's the general update on the produced water rulemaking. Again, the amount of appreciation that was provided to the consortium was significant, and I really want to make sure that I share my appreciation as well for the amount of work that this consortium has done. And as Commissioner Ackerman indicated, there really is no such precedence for a group of 31 diverse stakeholders to be able to develop this level of analysis, study, and recommendations in as short a time period as we have. And that really reflects on the dedication and the work that has been done by all the consortium members, and the willingness to really look at ways to pragmatically collaborate around difficult topics and creatively think about big ideas. And so kudos to all of you for the amount of work that we have done to this point, and looking forward to continuing our work as we have more big challenges and big ideas that need to be worked on over the next year or so. And so thanks for that. I'm happy to take questions about the ultimate outcomes of the rulemaking. I don't want to rehash the rulemaking, but I'm happy to take questions on what ultimately was the outcome. So, Barbara?
Yes, as you're handing out kudos, I think the majority of the volunteers here on this stakeholder group called the consortium would agree that we couldn't have done it without your leadership to bring us together, your mandate of staying curious, and the wonderful staff that has been put in place to support us. So it's not just us volunteers, but your leadership and Hope and her team.
Well, thank you, Barbara. I really appreciate that. It's been a pleasure working with you all, and I continue to look forward to the work we'll accomplish in the future. Any other questions about the rulemaking? Okay, with that, we will continue down the agenda. And next up is public comment. And so I know we have two public commenters. I don't have their names in front of me, but if we could elevate those public commenters and maybe drop the agenda from the screen share, so I can see people a little better. We'll have them share their thoughts. We are going to limit those thoughts to 3 minutes today. We've got a lot to accomplish in a short amount of time. And so I am looking. Maybe someone could identify who the first public commenter is.
We had a public comment from Mylene Vialard, but it does not look like she is present. So
Okay.
I will elevate the second public comment, which is from Angelique Rodriguez.
Okay.
Angelique, you are now able to talk.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I appreciate your time today. I have a few things that I just wanted to bring to attention and ask to be my request is that these be considered. And yeah, and basically with regards to the report that was sent and the information that I contributed, and I see that my name is on that draft, original or first draft. I really feel I have to say disappointed in the information that was extracted from that data, from all that research that was contributed. My entire point of all of that was to bring up the potentials of micromediation, to look at some of the newer technologies, and not one mention of that. In all of these 66 pages from this first draft, not one mention of everything that I've been asking the consortium to hear and to take into consideration and to incorporate in these thoughts in these first drafts in these ways that we move forward. And it's extremely disappointing the way that I feel the information was used, totally, completely missing the point of why I sent it. And I just want to state for the record that what is in that first draft is nothing that I endorse or encourage. I think that this is a blatant disrespect. And it's just really sad to see how everyone is so eager to move forward with such little information and such little accountability and responsibility to the people's whose lives you will be affecting as the headwaters in Colorado. It's extremely disappointing to me to see the direction that this is taking with the lack of consideration for public comment that has been, in my opinion, very clear of the ask, and to be completely and not at all acknowledged in this draft. The other thing I would like to know is, where is the accountability and responsibility to the oil and gas industry? I hear a lot of recommendations and guidelines that you're setting. I see nothing about any kind of repercussions to them in violation of these rules, of these guidelines that they're set to follow. I think that's a little disturbing and alarming that there's no accountability being put into this draft for this industry. The other thing is I would like to address that, as far as I'm concerned, or as I'm aware, the wording within this whole thing, the bill talks about permanent structures for disproportionately impacted communities. And as I see pictures of how the industry is working these waters, they're all temporary rail cars. So I want to address and acknowledge the fact that great, let's have that talk about disproportionate communities, but then let's also talk about the loophole that's been created within the industry that everyone is okay and just looking over that these are temporary sites that are being set up to process this water. And there are no regulations and no outlines and no guidelines to protect these communities or any communities from these temporary sites. And I think that needs to be acknowledged and needs to be addressed moving forward with the toxicology. There's no evidence to show that this is a safe thing. Those quotes that in all the documentation, you guys really missed the fact that there was a lot of statements regarding the need for more testing, the levels of danger, and just that we're not ready for this. And if they're already putting it in Wellington, where are the permissions and why are these waters being released to into aquifers already in Colorado without these laws and these toxicological reports being made and already known? And who is responsible for that?
Angelique, you're over your time. If you could wrap up your comments, that'd be great.
Yeah, I would just like to say that, this really feels, I'm really disappointed. I know that, everybody's patting each other on the back about what was accomplished, but as a constituent, as a member of this community, I would like to disagree and say I'm hugely disappointed in how things are moving forward for the people. My ask is consideration of those points that I brought up and for the consortium to look into those articles closer so that they can see what is actually being said there.
Thank you for your comments and for being here and providing that feedback. Feedback is certainly part of what we ask for when we provide drafts to these topics, and so thank you for that. With that, do we have the other public commenter with us?
No.
Okay. So next up on the agenda is for Assistant Director for Research, Sid Lacco, to provide an overview of the first draft of Deliverable 9. Again, this was a literature review that was required by HB 23-1242 and really was a compilation of lots of different perspectives on the topic from lots of different studies that have been done up until this point, and to provide us a base of knowledge as we look at continued work of the consortium moving forward. There's no findings or conclusions that are associated with the draft, but rather just providing information on studies that have been done previously. So Assistant Director Sidlako, I kick it off to you.
Thank you, John. I apologize, everybody. I'm a little sick today. 'Tis the season, I guess, so I will try to get through this without coughing too much. Good morning, everybody. This is our review of the first draft of Deliverable 9. Once again, it's the first draft under Colorado's House Bill 23-1242. And I'd like to start by thanking the consortium members who have shared their feedback during this early review stage. Your input has helped shape this first draft. Our work so far has involved reviewing over 100 publications and talking to industry leaders. We focused on assessing the potential for reuse of produced water outside the oil field through the evaluation of the current state of analytical and toxicological methods. So let's dive in. Stay on this slide, Emma. House Bill 23-1242 charges us with evaluating analytical and toxicological methods and tools for the consideration of potential produced water reuse outside the oil fields by July 2025. Today's draft, the first step toward that goal, addresses three pillars essentially: analytical characterization, toxicity assessment, and decision-making frameworks to protect human health, communities, and the environment. I know many of you have read and commented on the first draft, and we have until June to finalize the final draft. Sorry, next page. So this is what we're tasked with. We need to focus on analytical methods to characterize produced water and toxicological methods and other tools to evaluate its use outside the oil field. So we're really tackling two critical questions here. One, how do we even characterize something as complex as produced water? And two, what tools do we have to evaluate its safety in reuse outside of the oil field? Your early feedback has already highlighted gaps in standardization, which I've again highlighted in this presentation, so everyone kind of knows where we're starting from here. Sorry. Oh, excuse me. Up until now, the only beneficial reuse we've looked at is in-field reuse for the last 8 deliverables. And now we're sort of just dipping our toe in the outfield reuse idea to see what's out there, what the current state of knowledge is. But not all reuse is created equal. While infield recycling for enhanced oil recovery is pretty common, outfield uses like irrigation demand much stricter safeguards. So our analysis here prioritizes methods that address the risks specific to each scenario, whether reducing salinity for crops or removing radium. No matter what we consider, the methods have to align with the potential end use. Again, I'm sorry. And what we found so far is that we need to treat it to reuse it outfield. There's a much more detailed discussion on treatment in the report, and Table 1 gives a good summary of treatment methods and what constituents are removed. But essentially, produced water treatment technologies can be categorized into these 3 main stages: pretreatment, desalinization, and polishing. Each stage serves a specific purpose in the treatment process and uses various methods to remove contaminants and make the water suitable for whatever end use is desired. Pretreatment essentially gets rid of the muck. Desalinization gets rid of the salts and most of the hydrocarbons and VOCs, or volatile organic compounds. And polishing takes things a bit further to get to whatever endpoint you want, removing residuals and surfactants and even targeted compounds if that's what you want. Regarding analytical methods, the complexity of produced water requires a multi-layered analysis. So what's in it? Well, it's sort of like this chemical labyrinth, really. There's a geogenic portion that's naturally occurring in the formation, like hydrocarbons and salts, and even radioactive constituents. And there's a synthetic portion that's added to the injection fluid and has surfactants and biocides and other stuff like you see on Frac Focus. All this stuff together makes it what we call a complex matrix. You'll see that term a lot in the literature if you look, and you've probably heard it here as well. But it's true, it is a complex matrix. The big categories are listed here on the left. Basic water quality of TDS and TOC, or total dissolved solids, and total organic carbon, essentially the solid junk in the water. Inorganics like arsenic and chloride. So think of the periodic table. Organics, VOCs, and a lot of what we call the unknown unknowns. Essentially anything that has a carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen joined together. The chemical nasties, as it were. Naturally occurring radioactive material like radium and uranium, and biological components, or the living nasties. This flowchart synthesizes data from over 150 studies and was conducted by our friends in New Mexico. The main takeaway here is over 13,000 or 1,300, compounds have been identified in produced water. And you'll see the categories that I mentioned on the slide before compose the first row of constituents as you moved from left to right across the top of the screen. So again, basic water quality, inorganics, radioactive material, organics, and biologics. The analytical methods listed in the bottom row of circles are how we detect these components in produced water, the analytical methods we use to identify those constituents. And as you see, there's not one magic method that can tell us everything. And characterizing the water with all these methods, including IC and ICP-MS, GCMS, and LCMS, so advanced mass spectrometry, can get pretty complicated. Non-targeted high-resolution LCMS, or liquid chromatography mass spectrometry, allows us more of an unbiased approach. We're not looking for specific things. We're letting the instrument sort of tell us what's in the water by very simply comparing compound signatures to library databases of mass and signal and retention time, or sometimes just mass and a guess of a structure by how it fragments. Non-target analysis isn't just innovative, it's showing up in the literature review as a pretty important tool to help fill these knowledge gaps of unknown compounds. This has led to the multi-tiered approach that researchers at New Mexico are using now with the NPDES Plus list. We talked a little bit about that at the last meeting, and that's all spelled out a bit better in the first draft if you're interested, but it's a little too complicated to go into here. Excuse me. So that was your crash course in analytical methods. And here's a quick intro to toxicological methods. Traditional wet testing exposes test organisms like this fish on the right to various water qualities and measures endpoints like survival, growth, and reproduction. The paper I reference here was just published in the last few months, and it's a leap from Daphnia toxicity tests, like the simpler model toxicity tests that often don't correlate as well with human exposure. So toxicity is kind of like, wait, maybe we don't have to know the unknown constituents if we can understand what the outcome is for the whole living thing taken together on human health. In this study referenced here, exposed zebrafish embryos were exposed to the whole produced water matrix, and they saw developmental and toxicological impacts, including no heartbeat after 48 hours. This water was in compliance for the metals component, but residual organics and other constituents collectively taken together caused toxicity. And then the last couple rows of these fish shows a post-treatment like GAC or granulated activated carbon to achieve a non-toxic effect. We also have more advanced methods like the human cell line work that James Rosenblum presented last year, and gene expression or biomarker approaches to toxicology. In fact, that multi-tiered approach that I mentioned New Mexico is working on also includes both an analytical and toxicological component that looks at this toxicity assessment a bit more holistically. Next slide. In addition to the analytical and toxicological methods, we also have other tools. From ecotox models to EnviroScreen's metrics, these tools can help us balance safety and impact. For example, EnviroScreen flags areas where greater than 40% are people of color, a threshold refined through your feedback to avoid under-prioritizing rural or urban communities. We have an expert on EnviroScreen right here, and I encourage you all to explore the tools listed in this first draft. That experience is not really something I can report on in a lit review, but these tools are here for your consideration and are accessible through that draft. Speaking of tools, I do want to take a second to introduce you to Table 2 in the draft report. I know people tend to skip over tables, but I think you might find this one useful. So here's an example of the first few rows in the draft. You can see at the top that produced water parameters or constituents and its units of measurement are the first two columns going down. The two main sections after that in the header show end-use guidelines, where they're available, and typical water quality of produced water from oil and gas basins. So theoretically, you could see how much a constituent in produced water would have to be treated to get to this level required for a particular end use. Here I've highlighted the Midland Basin column in blue and power plant cooling standards in yellow. So in this example, you can see that we'd have to significantly reduce the alkalinity of the Midland water to be able to use it in a power plant cooling application, among other things, of course. The table goes on for 3 pages or so, but I think it's helpful and hope you will too. Here's another quick summary of a section in the report that deals with case studies. From Pennsylvania's Marcellus Basin recycling to Texas cotton farms, reuse is already happening. New Mexico's hemp trials and Wyoming's livestock watering projects show a potential for viability, but the success of any of these projects really hinges on treatment to meet the non-toxic benchmarks. Through the literature review to date, several challenges seem to be most prevalent and many hiding beneath the surface. The first is the chemical complexity. As Cloel's often cited paper, I hope she's not embarrassed, but her paper identified 1,198 unique constituents in produced water and found that only 290 of them have EPA-approved test methods. So there's a lot we can't currently analyze to EPA standards. There's also regulatory gaps with incomplete and sometimes conflicting guidelines. And of course, there's cost. Advanced treatments can be costly. So there's a lot of uncertainty that we have to deal with. It's kind of a work in progress, much like this draft. Some key takeaways are that this is a first draft. And if you hadn't had time to read it, please do. Add your comments, engage with this draft. We've based the report on over 100 documents and interviews, and there's a wealth of knowledge out there. Some of this knowledge points to things that we don't know, and that's really the goal. There's plenty of time for review, and I know there are several areas that some of you have identified as areas for future research, including a more thorough community impact assessment, environmental footprint of end uses, cost analysis, greenhouse gas emissions, risk profiles, and legal questions regarding ownership, liability, and spills. These are all areas to consider for future work and are important, but they are not within the scope of this deliverable on analytical and toxicological methods. And I encourage you to please keep that in mind when reviewing this draft. Lastly, it's important to recognize a large body of work related to this topic. Here are just the few references cited in these slides. We continue to build a growing library of resources for all to use, and I appreciate the papers that you have sent me. We have loads of time before June to get this in good shape, so please keep them coming. Thank you all for your commitment to exploring the idea of potentially turning produced water from a waste into a resource. As we move towards the July deadline, remember that every barrel reused is a step closer to resilience, water resilience. And since this weekend is St. Patrick's Day, may your luck be as abundant as those literary resources. My mom was 100% Irish, and she'd be turning over in her grave if I didn't give you all an Irish blessing today. So thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Director Sidlako, for the overview and the work that you and many others have done on the draft. And as you've indicated, it is a draft. I mean, that's why we go through this process. Our standard process is identifying, a process, and then developing the draft, and then taking feedback on the draft based on that feedback, ultimately coming up with a final product for the consortium to review. So with that, many of you I know have had an opportunity to review this and have already provided comments. Some of you I know we're all busy, may have not had an opportunity to review it yet, but this is a good opportunity to ask questions of Assistant Director Sidlako, provide some feedback here on the draft, and enable her to continue her work towards developing what ultimately will be a final draft at some point in the future. So I'd like to open it up to the consortium for questions or comments. So, Chloe?
I actually believe Tessa was first.
Okay, I can't see.
Though she's giving me the you go ahead.
You go ahead, Chloe. It's fine.
Okay. Thank you for this overview, Erin, and I hope you feel better very soon. I have I just want to put something out there that I'm not sure, and I apologize, I haven't been able to review this as deeply as I had hoped before today. The EPA has a database. It's sort of a database of databases, and some of the researchers at have taken the Danforth list and have put it through their sort of trying to identify, what information do we have about those chemicals, both toxicological as well as other analytical methods outside of the limited list of analytical methods that I looked at. So there are more tools out there. Whether or not we can use them in sort of a regulatory context under a permit is more of an open question and something that I can't quite answer. But because we're doing a literature review, we're thinking about the things that we need. I just wanted to say that there's a lot in that list that can be caveated both to expand or contract. The other point that I wanted to make about reuse endpoints for things like, municipal water or ag and livestock, those are often developed based on a different degraded water source, like municipal water. So a lot of the standards have been developed that have just bacterial loading. So just another consideration that, those unknown and those lists and limits that are developed for degraded water reuse, where they exist, need to be carefully considered if they're applicable for, the very complex waste that we have here. Those are the 2 points that I just wanted to put on the record.
Thank you, Coel. I really appreciate that.
Oh, by the way, I'm Chloe Danforth.
Of the Danforth list, Danforths. I'm sorry, I have to give a shout out to you, Chloe. Tessa Sorensen, CDPHE, and first I want to say tremendous amount of work. I think this looks like a great first draft. There's a lot in here and a lot of unknowns to try and tackle to put in here. So I really want to kind of express, I think I speak for a lot of the consortium members, if not all of them, in terms of how much we appreciate that. And just kind of the pride of being able to serve on the same consortium with the people referenced as some of the leaders that in these fields on this report in particular. I had one comment and one question. One comment actually leads exactly off of what Chloe was saying. Having gotten the opportunity last year to tour Denver Water's recycling facility, which is actually aimed, as you were saying, Chloe, at municipal end use waters that are then recycled to be used as gray water for other applications, which actually is an example. I think the majority of their water actually goes to Excel for their power plant there that's right across the street. And so knowing, I'd be interested to hear more or see more or maybe have a reference put into there if possible in terms of, have there been any studies that have studied the gaps between that sort of gray water as defined by taken from municipal effluent or something else? Apologize if I'm not using the correct technical terms. Not produced water, right? That has possibly so many more contaminants that are not identified or considered in terms of end use guidelines. So seeing kind of that gap analysis, if anyone's done that study, or if that's noted as a gap analysis that has yet to be effectively done, I think would be worth noting at the least on there. And the other question I had was on table 2, since you called out for Aaron, and I hope you feel better soon. I'm sorry you had to talk so much today. Um, in table 2, blanks are zeros or unknowns?
They're unknowns.
Okay.
It needs filled out.
Yeah, can we note that on that
Mhm.
table? Maybe in the caption, just to say that, if there's no value, it means it's an unknown, not a zero.
Yep.
Because I suspect that DJ basin water couldn't be used for power plant cooling as is.
Right.
And so I want to make sure that's clear, that the table couldn't be misinterpreted.
Yes, and the references all apply to the states in which they're, based on. So that's not filled out in the table yet either. I'll
Right.
make
Yeah. No worries. I know it's not a final product, so
Thank
they've
you.
already planned that. So, but it looks very, very informative.
Thank you.
Barbara?
Yeah, I just wanted to congratulate you on a really good overview presentation in spite of the illness you're struggling with, Erin. It was really very well done. But the thing I want to call out is the cautionary approach that you're taking. Much appreciated, because I know that there's tremendous enthusiasm on the part of all kinds of potential end users that we get to an answer tomorrow. And I think we need to be very careful in the decision matrix that we end up producing and forwarding in a final report. So thank you again.
Agreed. Thank you, Barb.
Carmio?
Hey, to further the conversation that we're having about the potential gap. So when it comes to just industrial water use, I'm assuming that certain industries may route their wastewater to municipal treatment, and others may release it. Can anybody speak to that, how it works, and if we need to consider all of those different possibilities?
Could you repeat that question one more time, Carmia?
Okay, so so I know, for instance, Tessa was asking if there's been a gap analysis between municipal and use water for gray water reuse versus industrial and use water. I'm just taking a step back even further and trying to understand just general industrial wastewater or end use water. I'm assuming that wastewater from industries, just like I said, in general, that sometimes industries route that water to municipalities for treatment, and other times I'm assuming that they may treat it and then discharge it. I'm just want to make sure that we're considering all of those possibilities. And if somebody can speak to that, if there's different standards and
Yeah, I'll chime in there a little bit. James Rosenblum, Colorado School of Mines, and an academic seat. On the, industrial, yes, surely they're, industrial dischargers, and Tesla could probably speak to this better than I can, but they obviously have limits that they need to hit for if they are discharging or, I'm going to say discharging to a river or stream, but providing that water to a wastewater treatment plant. And they have certain limits they need to get, again, that CDPHR, the regulatory agencies, will provide for them. Again, whether that be direct discharge or into a wastewater treatment plant. So, that is one way, on the industrial side. And then on the produced water side, it hasn't, it has happened at scale in a few locations. NGL, Doug White here, who'd speak to a little bit more on how things operated in Pinedale, Wyoming for a produced water to discharge. But essentially, Wyoming provided them a discharge limit and guides they had to follow for daily limits and monthly limits. And they essentially had to provide reports and meet those guides to discharge into a stream in Pinedale, Wyoming. There's another plant that was out in the Northeast. I can't remember the name of that company that did that in the Marcellus. But yeah, so I guess broadly, if you're a traditional industrial discharger, that doesn't have as complex the complexity of water and the volumes that we have, they surely have lists and limits they need to hit before it enters into a wastewater treatment system like a sewer system or theoretically a discharge. On the flip side, the few facilities that have occurred to date had their own permits for discharge provided by state agencies and frequency in which they needed to test and things of that nature. I hope that answers that a little bit.
Yes, thank you.
I think we've got Cloel, so I'll call on Cloel. We've got Brandy Honeycutt with us from CDPHE that may be able to provide some perspective on the topic, and then I will identify, and this is just a comment from me, that maybe a reference to the treatment roadmap that we developed in one of the previous deliverables may help in this literature review as well, to kind of better understand current process for some wastewater streams as well. So I'm going to call on Brandy first, and then I'll go to you, Cloel. Go ahead, Brandy.
Hi, everybody. Thanks. Yeah, I agree with Cloel and Tessa about looking at this report draft and thinking we're not really comparing apples to apples. Reclaimed domestic wastewater is a totally different ballgame than produced water. So I want to caution from taking the data that's out there about the safety to public health and environment of reclaimed water, domestic wastewater as a source, and comparing it to the safety of using produced water for these same uses. I think this is a great draft and a good start. I'm making some comments in here. I think I'm very excited that Michael Jane is and that the EPA can work on the specifics around produced water, because I think that's the data we really need to assess the public health and environmental impacts. And in terms of the industrial reuse standards that we have for reclaimed water, they're pretty low. We have E. coli and turbidity and TSS standards in our reclaimed water regulation. But we don't look at things like TDS, which I suppose reclaimed water isn't going to have nearly as high TDS as produced water. So that's an example of not comparing apples to apples. And so I think there's some gaps we need to look at.
Thanks, Brandy. Cloel?
I was just going to add to James's explanation for industrial treatment via sort of more traditional treatment systems. There's also what are known as centralized wastewater treatment systems, CWTs, which can treat industrial waste. There and have been used to treat produced water. There's a different sort of effluent limitation guideline under the Clean Water Act. There's also a report from 2018 put out by EPA that found they were largely inappropriate for treating produced water, given sort of these other larger considerations, mostly TDS, but some other things. So, just to sort of echo, this is an opportunity to think through things that don't quite fit produced water as well as they do domestic wastewater, and to, go slow. Thank you.
Thanks, Cloel. Brandy, is your hand still up because you want to speak? Okay.
I do have another point that I came up with.
Go ahead. Yeah.
We do in Regulation 84 have a separate water quality and treatment framework for what we call localized systems, which are smaller systems with higher pathogen content in the effluent, basically. And we really are concerned with pathogens in those systems, but that framework might fit these produced water situations, because I don't know how much produced water, I should know this, but I don't know how much produced water comes out of a particular site or whatever. But if they're small systems, looking at it from a higher concentration of constituents standpoint might be a framework we want to mimic from what we have in Reg 84.
Thanks. James?
Yeah, I would just kind of, a lot of context from Brandy and Cloel. Just this notion of comparing, reuse water, municipal reuse water, and produced water is just how long we've spent studying municipal wastewater. What is in it? 50 years, 40 years of studying what is in municipal water and what are hazards and risks and how to treat them and remove them and the tools and this, things Brandy's talking about, Reg 80 or the DPR rules that we've come out with. But we've had so much time to study municipal wastewater and understands its hazards and risks, and there's surely new ones that we're identifying, PFAS, for example. And when you kind of take that time and amount of data and information that's been done in this space, to get to where we are today with DPR, guidelines and regs being put in place, flip that to the produced water, where you think about it's unconventional oil and gas is a relatively new thing, compared to municipal wastewater, and secondary effluent discharge. I'd say the oil field is moving at lightning speed, but still it is a newer water that we're trying to understand, and certain basins have more information than others. We're fortunate that we've had a lot of federal funding to go into research for specifically Denver-Julesburg water. But that is just this context of it is a newer water that we're understanding and developing methods for. And again, we are moving quickly and publishing a lot of papers. It's like an exponential curve if you just produced water, characterization or treatment, but it's still much newer than, municipal water. And we just this context of time and how much more we know about municipal water than produced water and the tools and the hazards and risks. So just want to provide that context.
Thanks. Are there further comments or questions for Assistant Director Sidlako on the draft itself? Understanding that there'll be opportunities to individually reach out to her and provide comment on the draft itself as she continues to update and refine the work product. So, Carmia?
Okay, so one more question. Thank you. Carmi with the Bureau of Land Management. So I know that based on my experience, but then also reviewing the first draft, that coal bed methane produced water, I feel like there's been a fair amount of research on that, but having not, reviewed the articles like others have, what is the general sense on non-coal bed methane? Has there been much research that you've seen? In summary, Erin.
Oh, for me, yes. It seems like there's more research that I've seen, at least with coal bed methane, but there's certainly research coming out in other forms of produced water. I think it's just easier to use. I don't know that for a fact. Maybe our Western Slope folks might have a better idea. But yeah, I'm trying to put them both in there, and I know they're not the same, right? We're not apples to apples, and I'm trying not to compare different wastewaters across the states or, even within a basin. But we got to start somewhere to look at this.
Lowell?
I was just going to say, and it's been a while since I've looked at the literature, but what I do remember about coal bed methane reuse, particularly irrigation reuse, has been done in Wyoming. It is much less saline. It can have other potential constituents of concerns, like polyaromatic hydrocarbons, which are known human carcinogens, and we have pretty low standards for those. So it's again, it's apples to oranges a bit in that, we might consider a different suite of chemicals. It is saline enough that without careful consideration of just using it without treatment, it can cause some what is the word I'm trying to say? It can start inhibiting groundwater infiltration. So it's just another consideration for, we don't want to put salt on our crops because it causes all kinds of problems that are difficult to remediate later. So there's a little bit in there. I think it has many of the same questions. And so in terms of like a framework of how to kind of come at this, I think we can use similar thinking, if that's helpful.
I may make one recommendation there too, Aaron, if you would reach out to Rick Allison at ECMC. There was some legislation in 2023 that asked ECMC to do ECMC and CDPHE to do some water quality analysis associated with coal bay methane produced water in the Raton Basin in Colorado. And that's almost complete. It's not quite complete yet, but I think that would be good information from a Colorado specific level to incorporate in this as well. Whatever the ultimate determination of that study was. And so just a thought there.
Thank you.
James?
And I guess kind of maybe final, but just context of we did do that study that the Martinez-Irwin Fund helped support analytical testing on. So we have that data that I think I've shared with Aaron and others at the consortium. If not, happy to do that. And then we are working on a manuscript that, again, it was a treatment train that looked at a bunch of different evaluation methods from raw produced water to a theoretical discharge. Again, it was all done within the lab and contained within totes and all disposed of properly. And then, just on the context of coal bed methane, this idea that minimal treatment is done. If you're looking at the Piceance or the Denver-Julesburg, we do need to desalinate, which means it's likely going to go through a tight membrane process or a thermal process. Luckily, we have low enough total dissolved solids that membranes are available, which means it's going to require multiple pretreatment steps, and then this very tight membrane to remove kind of all the way to salt. So again, we've had some data to support what is there, what we looked at, analytical methods, both the in vitro bioassays that Aaron mentioned earlier, all the way to non-targeted methods. So a good data set that the consortium will have access to that we can use is kind of a at least a starting point for a theoretical scenario. Again, just data done at a small pilot.
Okay. Aaron, do you have questions for consortium members at this point, or any clarification on comments or questions that they had posed?
I feel like you guys have given me a lot to think about. There's certainly much more research to be done, and I would ask that any of you with specialties in any of these areas that were hit upon as incomplete in this report, if you could assist me in adding some comments or maybe even a paragraph in the report where it best suits the answer, that would be super helpful. Or if we can have a conversation offline about how best to tackle a particular consideration.
Right. So I will then ask the consortium, are you comfortable with Aaron continuing to work on the draft and incorporating your feedback and information and her willingness to or encourage you to reach out to her to provide additional information both within the document and maybe outside the document? Are we good with those next steps as a further draft gets developed for our review at a future meeting? Anyone have heartburn? Chloe?
I don't have heartburn. Thank you. I just would strongly encourage a section in the report on limitations. I know we have key takeaways, but I think a summary of gaps, limitations, and I know that's the whole point, is to identify that. But I want to just hammer home that point and make sure that it's these are the things that we see as points of continued research.
Thank you. That is the goal.
Great. Well, with that, then I think we're going to move on to a break. So I think we've got our next agenda item intended to start at 10:30. It's 10:12 now. So why don't we start the next item a little early and take a break until 10:25, and then we'll have Wendy Padilla present to us the updated policy handbook for boards and commissions. So back at 10:25. Okay, we're gonna get started here in a minute. Before we get started, I did forget to mention something about the produced water rulemaking. Was that Greg Durando, ECMC staff, are actually going to provide a significantly more in-depth presentation on the new rules at the next meeting. So what overview I gave was just that, a quick overview. So I know people may want a lot more detail than that, and that's to be provided at the next meeting. So sorry for forgetting that when I provided the update. But with that, I'm going to introduce Wendy Padilla to provide us overview of updates to the policy handbook for boards and commissions. So welcome.
Thank you, John. As John said, my name is Wendy Padilla. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Colorado Department of Natural Resources. And in your packet and the calendar invitation, there is the full boards and commissions handbook, and I'm going to hit some highlights for you today. So about the Department of Natural Resources, I'll take the opportunity to kind of give you a broad overview of the entire department. We'll go over a little bit about the budget process, our code of ethics, accessibility for meetings, media contacts, legislative policies, procedures, and timelines. And I am not able to see hands for whatever reason. So if somebody is raising a hand, just please let me know and I can stop, just ask questions along the way.
I'll take care of that. So
thank you. So Kyle will cover a lot of the other topics that I'm not going to cover. It's really his lane, which includes kind of OML, Open Records Act, public comment, conflicts of interest, disclosure, and the code of ethics, that sort of thing. So real quickly about the Department of Natural Resources, our overall mission is really to manage and conserve Colorado's natural resources for the benefit of people today and tomorrow. We have 6 divisions. So we manage water, land, wildlife, minerals, energy resources, and outdoor recreation. The Colorado State Forest Service also staffs the Division of Forestry for us. And in addition, we also house the Colorado Avalanche Information Center. In this current fiscal year, we have an annual budget of about 498 million, about 1,800 employees. And then with seasonal temporary employees, especially for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, that number grows by about 1,000 every summer. And we also have about 4,000 volunteers that work with us. Our divisions, you can kind of see the acronyms there. Colorado Parks and Wildlife are the 2 big green and blue bars. They're our largest division by far with about 1,000 employees and the largest budget. You'll see the Energy and Carbon Management Commission there as well. And our Energy and Carbon Management Commission is the second largest with a little over 200 FTE. Our state budget process begins in March every year, and it's approximately 16 months prior to the start of the fiscal year when funding will actually be available. So the way that works to get budget for any program or needs is that our executive director's office will work with division staff to identify and prioritize those needs. And those materials are deliberative and confidential until November 1st. On November 1st, all the state departments release their public budget requests, and those are posted online and then delivered to the legislature for consideration. So between November and January, we're in that process right now. For the next fiscal year, starting in July, our joint budget committee of the legislature is briefed and decides on whether or not to approve requests and then to codify them into the long bill. And then each chamber reviews and proposes amendments. So for this fiscal year coming up, whatever is in the long bill would be adopted effective July 1st. I'll go through our code of ethics. In addition to Colorado's code of ethics and statutory requirements, DNR has a code of ethics to promote ethical standards, transparency, accountability, excellence in achieving our mission. And I neglected to mention that the Department of Natural Resources has approximately 9 major boards and commissions, and then many, many more, between 20 to 30 additional committees, consortiums, those types of things. And so really all of our employees as well as our volunteer members, we asked to follow the Public Service Code of Ethics. And there's 8 elements, and you can read them here. Really to promote that transparency, public participation, professional ethics, and personal integrity. A little bit about accessibility, especially for our public meetings. We really want all members of the public to have accessible, equitable access to public meetings and to all of our programs and services. So anyone wishing to participate in meetings can contact DNR's ADA coordinators. And we have that information on our website, and it's listed in the handbook, dnr.colorado.gov/accessibility. And then you can also email accessdnr@state.co.us. And obviously, a lot of the online meetings are very accessible. And then you can also contact the meeting organizers if you need accommodations for anything. The next few sections on media, legislative items, are really intended to kind of have that role clarity for when the consortium is speaking as one versus when individual consortium members are speaking either for their primary employer or just in their personal capacity. So this is really meant to kind of distinguish the two and just some rules of the road to think about. So you may get contacted by members of the media just around consortium business. And to ensure transparency, just remember that commenting on any official consortium actions, operations, or business requires coordination with your staff liaisons and the public information folks, either from the Executive Director's Office or ECMC. And you all may have additional guidance from your chair and from your staff liaisons as well. A little bit about the legislative procedures. We have a Director of Legislative Affairs. Every department has one person who is responsible for that per department. And Daphne Gervais, email address at the bottom, coordinates all communication with legislators and all department-initiated legislation. If you are contacted by a legislator for factual information, consult with your staff liaison for sure, and refer them to your staff liaison and to the Director of Legislative Affairs. The Colorado General Assembly right now, of course, is in session, but you also may be contacted year-round because there are year-round committees. As a department in the executive branch, the DNR does not take positions on bills unless approved to do so by the governor. And there's a variety of different positions: support, oppose, amend, neutral, or no position. And really, Daphne is there to help kind of navigate anything. If you're looking at bills moving through the legislature, your staff liaisons are absolutely happy to help as well. However, if you're individual member and you want to take a position or offer testimony on personal time and not acting in your official capacity, you're absolutely welcome to do so. And we ask that you just clearly state that you are speaking in a personal capacity and not on behalf of the consortium. And then finally, a little bit about electioneering and the Fair Campaign Practices Act. And what that does is restrict the use of public monies to urge votes for or against statewide or local ballot initiatives or referred measures. And that includes staff work time and state staff resources. And again, individual consortium members are free to express personal opinions, use personal resources to express beliefs. And again, we ask if you do so, you state that you're speaking not on behalf of the consortium, but in your own personal capacity. And that is all I had. I just want to thank you for your service and for all of the expertise you're lending to the consortium. I'll take any questions or move along.
Thanks, Wendy. Any consortium members have questions? I am not seeing any questions, so thank you for that. AG Davenport, are you up next?
Thank you, Chairman Messner. Yes, I believe I'm up next. Give me one moment to share my screen, please. Is everybody able to see that? You should see a board training title screen. All right, great. Well, good morning, consortium members. My name is Kyle Davenport. I'm a senior assistant attorney general in the Attorney General's office. I know that many of you know me, but I know we have some new folks, and so I thought I'd introduce myself. Most of my time is spent representing ECMC, but I'm also your counsel. And so please feel free to use me for any legal questions you may have as counsel to you in your capacity as a member of the consortium. As Hope said, I'm planning on covering a number of topics today. They're listed on this slide right now. Given the limited time and the fact that many of you may have heard my presentation before 2 years ago, or have gotten training on this, I'm not planning on going into great depth on any of these. And in many cases, my main goal is to make you aware that they exist and apply to the business of the consortium so that you have a little red light in the back of your head that may go off and you know enough to know that you need to ask me a question. I'm going to spend most of my time probably on this first topic, open meetings law, but I will cover the rest of these things in probably more superficial level. I'll ask for questions at the end of each topic. In many cases, the questions are probably more valuable than my training, but I may answer your questions as I go through a topic. So if you would, please hold on to your questions until I cover a topic entirely. Thank you. I'm going to start with open meetings law. This slide shows the statutory citations, the declaration of policy when the legislature adopted open meetings law. I know that constraints on public boards and bodies can be frustrating sometimes as a result of the open meetings law, but it's important to keep in mind that the entire purpose is to ensure that the public sees decision making as it's being done and can witness that process. So really the whole purpose is transparency and to avoid that any decisions are made in secret or not in public view. The kind of fundamental requirement is that meetings of the consortium and other state public bodies be held in public so that the public may attend. This is the statutory language that describes when something is a meeting that must occur in public. Unfortunately, as we'll get into, some of this is not exactly clear, and there's some gray area, and there's not a lot of court guidance on this, especially the bolded words there, public business. That's not defined by the statute, and there isn't a ton of case law that defines that either. So I would encourage you, if you have questions, to reach out to me or to Hope. Hope can pass questions along to me, and Hope's getting pretty well versed in open meetings law by now and may be able to answer your question herself. A meeting in general constitutes any conversation about public business between two or more members of this consortium. And that means any conversation, whether it's in any format, telephone call, email, text, anything like that. There are 3 scenarios where we would need to meet in public and also notice that meeting in advance. The first one is the one I've already highlighted as being the most ambiguous scenario, and that's where public business of the consortium is discussed. The second two are much more clear in my view. They are where the consortium meets to take formal action on something, or where the consortium meets and the majority or a quorum of the consortium is present. Public business. This first quote on the slide is from a decision by the Colorado Court of Appeals that sort of outlines the rationale the court uses to determine if public business is being discussed. It provides some guidance, but not everything we may need. And so again, I would encourage you to reach out to me or Hope if you have a concern that you may be participating in some type of meeting where another consortium member is attending, and there may be a discussion of consortium business. Certainly, if you are discussing with another consortium member formal action by the consortium or some other official action, that would need to be something that would comply with open meetings law. Again, meaning the public would need to be able to attend that and that it be noticed in advance to the public so that they have some warning and can attend that. The next two slides are discussing kind of what doesn't constitute a meeting, quote unquote, that needs to be in public. The fact that you may be discussing matters that are simply of public importance with other consortium members does not mean that you have to notice that to the public and allow them to attend. It is limited to consortium business. The other one is social gatherings. This one rarely arises, but it's worth noting. If you run into a consortium member at a social gathering, you don't have to say, oh gosh, we can't talk to each other. I would encourage you not to talk about consortium business in a happenstance meeting with another consortium member, but you can still talk to each other. And I want to pause here to note that I know you all do other things. You have jobs. You may serve on other boards or commissions. You may serve in other volunteer capacities. The hat that you are wearing in a legal sense matters. If you attend something as a consortium member, excuse me, that can make a difference as well. So when you attend something, part of my advice may be at times, be clear that you're not attending as a consortium member or you are, because that can matter as well. Should someone later say, I saw this meeting where two consortium members were present, and was that an open meeting violation or not? Because occasionally, not this consortium as I'm aware of, but certainly other state public bodies do get questions from the public about whether or not something was open meeting or had to meet the requirements or not. Just going back through this again, two or more consortium members discussing public business, any form of communication, it all matters, it all applies. And we'll get into Cora a little bit later, but yes, open meetings applies, and Cora as well applies to that too. And again, we'll get into Cora as well. That covers my very brief open meetings law presentation, and I would welcome questions if any member has a question about open meetings right now.
Well, if you have a question, you can raise your hand.
Okay.
Questions.
Not seeing any hands, but I'm happy to go backwards too in case someone comes up with something as I go through my presentation. This next slide applies to, and it is not advancing for me. Hold on. Executive session. Open meetings law does allow for this consortium to meet in private, but they're in very limited circumstances. The main one that I think we're all familiar with and aware of is to receive legal advice that may be better off not to be provided in public. a couple of things. I just want to note a couple of things here. First of all, we have to move formally to go into executive session. It takes a 2/3 vote of the entire membership of the consortium. And I'll highlight the differences between that and taking formal action. But the short version is we need to have a lot of people in attendance, consortium members in attendance to go into executive session. Their executive session is limited in what can be discussed. This is how we go into executive session, certainly to receive legal advice, but a few other purposes as well. The couple of things that I will note here. One, just simply my attendance does not make something an acceptable executive session. I need to actually be giving legal advice for that to apply. We can't make decisions in executive session. We need to come out of executive session and make decisions. Should there or allegations of violations of open meetings law, these are the potential consequences. They would invalidate should any state body take official action that was in violation of open meetings law, that the action can be invalidated. The prevailing party may be entitled to attorney's fees and costs. If we, for example, or a state public body violated open meetings law in executive session, another potential consequence could be release of that executive session to the public. We can always go back and cure something that may have happened in violations of open meetings law. Hopefully, we never have to do that, but there is a possibility to cure that violation. One thing I want also note about executive session, it is an executive session for the consortium, not advice to you in your capacities as whatever else you may do outside of your consortium work. Next thing I want to go to is CORA, or the Colorado Opens Records Act. It does apply to your work as consortium members. I just want to say a few things about CORA. I think many of us are familiar with it. First of all, we should all operate as if everything we write down is subject to CORA. I know there are exceptions. I will cover those in a minute. As your attorney, my advice is don't rely on an exception and assume that it will apply, because in general, those exceptions are very narrowly construed. So anytime you write something down, email, text, notes of a meeting, please be aware that it is probably subject to a CORA request. Anyone, anywhere, at any time can make a CORA request. They don't need to show why they want those records they ask for. So it's a very broad possibility of who may ask for public records. This generally uses the statutory language for what constitutes a public record. I think the best way to think about it is anything you write down is in furtherance of your work as a consortium member is a public record and is potentially subject to CORA. Personal accounts, just the fact that you may be making a consortium business call on a personal phone or using a personal email account does not save it from being a public record. If it is about consortium business, it's a public record, no matter what device or account you're using to discuss it. Okay, I didn't skip a slide. There are exceptions or exemptions to CORA. Probably the one that we run across most frequently are attorney-client communications. Here are a few more. I want to highlight the bottom bullet there. Those are narrowly construed. In general, we should all err on the side of treating things as a public record, because should there be an issue, a court certainly would err on the side of it being a public record. I believe that covers everything through open meetings law and CORA. I'll pause again for any questions on those topics. Okay. Conflicts of interest. You are subject to the Colorado Code of Ethics in addition to DNRs. code of ethics. Mostly, I just want you to be aware of these things in this presentation. Conflicts of interest. The big thing I want to say here is your jobs, other things you may do outside of consortium work, do not automatically create conflicts of interest. Obviously, for example, those of members who are volunteer members of other state public boards have other jobs. And it's possible that their businesses or industries as a whole may be benefited by what those state public bodies do. That does not mean there's a conflict of interest. Uh, it's really more personal to you. And the things that I would mostly be aware of are personal or close family financial benefits as a result of a action, as well as anything that may give the appearance of impropriety or make it difficult for you to be an impartial decision maker in that capacity. My advice generally is going to be when in doubt, disclose it. If you call me and say, should I disclose this? My advice is generally going to be if you thought enough to need to give me a call, probably disclose it. And that doesn't mean that you have to recuse yourself from it. You can say, for whatever reason, I know this person, they're presenting to me. I'll still be impartial on the topic that they're presenting to me to us on, and I don't need to disclose. I don't need to recuse myself from this. That's probably in 99% of the situations all you need to do. Briefly, I want to touch on something called the gift ban. This is a provision of the Colorado Constitution that prohibits certain members who are participating in government from accepting things of value. There is a limit of $75 per year per source on gift bans, meaning you can't accept things over the course of the year from one source over $75. At this point, all I want you to be aware of is that this exists. And if someone offers to buy you lunch so they can talk to you about your work as a consortium member or something else that raises a concern with you, just give me a call before you do that. Have that lunch or accept whatever it is. Here's a few more, a little more detail on the Colorado Code of Ethics. Generally, you have a very high duty to the people of Colorado to conduct yourself transparently and ethically. Here's the second bullet where I was trying to draw the distinction between just this may have a benefit to the industry in which you work as a whole or something else versus having a direct impact on you personally or a family member or something like that. It's the latter which really matters in conflicts of interest. And finally, I think this is the last one. The appearance of a conflict is just as important as actual conflicts. I'm sure you all aware the most important asset that any public body has is the trust of the public, and an allegation of a conflict that wasn't disclosed can be just as damaging to the public's trust as an actual conflict. I will stop there again for questions on anything I've covered up to this point. Okay. Last couple of things. First of all, the rules of order. I want to cover a few things here. The most important things are a quorum. This body, like any other body, can't conduct formal business without a quorum being present. Oh, I'm sorry. Consortium member McCurdy, I just saw your hand is raised.
And not a problem, AG Davenport. I was just now got to the button to raise it. With regards to the buying lunch situation, obviously part of my job in industry is to deal with various operators and companies, and occasionally that involves lunch. And a lot of times we pick it up, right? Is that a problem? Do I need to keep a journal of we bought lunch, but these were the items that were discussed that day, which would not be items associated with the consortium?
Well, as I understand your question, I believe you said we bought lunch. If you are buying lunch for somebody else, that's not a problem. If someone else is buying lunch for you, that potentially implicates the gift ban. But again, I'd want to talk about, as I mentioned previously, what hat are you wearing there makes a difference in that case. Are they buying lunch for you because you are a consortium member and they want to talk to you about consortium business? Or is this your day-to-day job? If it's your day-to-day job, then it doesn't implicate the gift ban.
Okay,
No,
that's where I was going with this,
yeah.
because there are one or two of the consortium members who are customers of my company. And so those discussions would have nothing to do with consortium. They would have to do with work that we are doing for them in the state of Colorado.
Then the gift ban isn't implicated.
Very good. Just wanted to confirm.
Okay. No, good confirmation. So returning to the rules of how this consortium does its business, we need a quorum to do anything formal, make a formal recommendation, adopt a report, any formal action. A quorum is a majority of consortium members, so 16 people need to be on the Zoom. 16 members need to be on the Zoom or on the room and in the Zoom or on the room and in the Zoom and on the phone, any combination of that for this consortium to take formal action. We can still meet without a quorum, so 15 or fewer members, but we can't take formal action without a quorum. And the distinction, the nuance there is formal action can be taken by a majority of the members in attendance. So in other words, we don't need 16 people voting in favor of something. We need a majority of the members in attendance for the consortium to take formal action. If only 16 members of the consortium are in attendance, a 9-8 vote in favor of something would still be formal action of the approved formal action of the consortium. Another distinction is here. Open meetings law provides that it's 2/3 of the entire membership of the body. So we would still need 2/3 membership of the entire 31 membership in attendance and voting in favor to go into executive session. There's a heightened bar there that in this presentation, in this context, only applies to going to executive session. The last bullet there I want to highlight as well, and this is more of a trying to keep an orderly meeting that the public can follow. We would ask that you, before you speak in a meeting in person, on Zoom, that you raise your hand and gain recognition of the chair. That's just so we don't talk over each other and the public can follow along. I'd also note that the chat is not a comment from you. I don't have any concern with what we've done so far in the chat, giving kudos, sending out links to things, but please don't make a substantive comment that you would like to make as a consortium member in the chat. It's not recorded. The public may not see it. Other members may not see it. And chats just don't work very well for making substantive comments. Motions, just there is a process. Generally, there needs to be a motion and a second, and the majority of the board of the consortium members in attendance need to approve it for that motion to pass. I believe this is my last point. Public comment. I want to note a few things. You don't have any statutory obligation to allow public comment. I think most boards, if not all, in Colorado do allow public comment. That's through the interest in hearing from the public, not because there's a statutory requirement to do so, at least in open meetings law. Individual boards, commissions may have in their own enabling statutes a requirement for public comment. But generally, there is no overarching requirement to allow for public comment. Open meetings law requires that the public attend meetings, not that you give the public the opportunity to speak at those meetings. You may control the length of time and tell members of the public who are commenting, please limit yourself to consortium business. But otherwise, the First Amendment generally prohibits controlling the content of public comments. That covers everything I wanted to talk about today. And one more opportunity for questions now. And of course, you are always welcome to email me and ask a question individually. Yes, I see Member Woolley having her hand up.
Thank you, Attorney General Davenport. So just for clarity for everyone, and thank you for going over all the rules. So after going through all of that, my impression is that if two or more members are having conversations that may influence reports or meetings, that we should save it for the meetings. But I'm assuming, though, that if we're having those conversations just to make progress on a subject matter, to share expertise, that it is encouraged to have those conversations, but include anything substantive that comes from those conversations in the report, or share it with the consortium at the next meeting.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing for real quickly so I can see everybody, but I'm happy to share it again. There is nuance in this, but generally I agree with what you just said. Educational or background discussions about topics that may relate to what the consortium does, I don't view as a requirement to meet in public to have those. So if you, for example, as a consortium member, reach out to another member and say, I want to understand better how produced water is currently used in oil and gas operations. I consider that to be an educational or background conversation that doesn't require it be done in an open meeting. If your conversation transitions into, well, okay, what do you think needs to go into the next report? Or should we do another report? Or should the consortium formally recommend some legislative change? At that point, you're discussing, in my view, something that would relate to a formal action by the commission, and you should not have that conversation in private between the two of you and save that for a public meeting. I would certainly encourage all of you to, if you have a substantive, non-open meeting conversation with another consortium member, to talk about that at the next consortium meeting. We do have a space for consortium member comments, and I think it increases public trust and transparency to disclose conversations. There's not, in my view, if it's not an open meetings issue, a legal requirement to do that, but it may be helpful for other consortium members to understand what conversations are being had, even if it's not something needs to be had in open meeting.
And AG Davenport, just to tell me if I'm wrong here, but a lot of times we request that individual consortium members reach out to staff to provide feedback on draft reports or studies or provide information. And if it's going from a consortium member to a staff person, then that's appropriate.
That's correct. The open meetings requirements only apply to conversations between consortium members. They do not apply to conversations between consortium members and members of consortium staff. So your conversations with Hope can be on any topic or another member of consortium staff without your having to worry about an open meetings issue. And that also applies to, there are times certainly that Hope may send out information, materials to all of you at the same time. Um, that is that type of sharing information is not an open meetings issue either. But I would caution you, please do not hit reply all to that. And if you all you want to do is respond to Hope and ask a question, please be careful that you're not replying all when you do that, because that's sort of one of those inadvertent things that can lead to an open meetings issue. Thought I saw another hand, but I don't see another hand now. So
It was mine. Hi, this is Nikki Wells. I think you answered my question. Last year around October, my dad passed away, and I kind of been out of seat for a while. So I had bumped into one of the members, and I wanted to catch up and like just get a recap of what had been going on. And I didn't want that to become a conflict of interest, but it seems to be that if we are having a conversation about what has been previously discussed, we're okay. And long as it doesn't convert into, okay, well, I think this needs to be happening. That is my understanding. Like, that is okay.
yeah, my condolences on your father. I'm very sorry to hear that. But yes, you're exactly right. I would agree with that. A recap. Hey, I missed the last couple of meetings. Can you let me know kind of what happened? Is fine. I Hope just raised your hand, and I was about to say you can also ask Hope certainly questions like that. Hope, can you recap the last couple of meetings for me? Um, but yes, you're exactly right that when that conversation transitions into, well, what should the consortium do next? Or I don't agree with what we did at the last meeting that I missed, and I want to bring up at the next meeting that I think the consortium should change that. Then you've probably transitioned into an open meetings issue. Hope.
Thank you, Attorney General Davenport. So I haven't been, as you said before, I'm learning quite a lot about open meetings law. I have been asking consortium members to work together, like for planning our meetings. So, for instance, I said, James, work with Sahi on planning our April 4th meeting, because it's like logistics and the building. Or is that okay? Because
that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have questions for AG Davenport? Thank you for providing that update and being support for the consortium. It's certainly appreciated. And thank you, Ms. Padilla, for being here and providing your information as well. So thanks for that.
Thank you all.
Hope, I think you had asked that Emma be able to provide a comment, and so this seems like a good time.
Hey everyone, I just wanted to real quickly clarify for everybody. There were Zoom meeting invites that were sent out for today, April 4th and June 6th, and those were sent out by mistake. The one that was sent out today started at 8:30. Those were errors. Those were not meant to be sent out. So those meetings and those meeting invites you guys can delete from your calendars, and a save the date and a meeting invite for the April 4th and June 6th meetings will be sent out by me.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for all the work that you've been doing, Emma, and keeping us organized and coordinated. Director Dalton, do we have anything else on the agenda that you'd like to talk about?
We were very efficient today and had a great presentation, great updates. I think we're done.
Okay. Well, reminder, April 4th, we're going to have an opportunity to review our strategic plan and update our work plan associated with that. Looking forward to that. We'll also look at an approach to one of the requests that was provided to us by the ECMC commissioners. We'll also have an opportunity to tour the water treatment facility. And so looking forward to that. And unless anyone has anything else for the good of the cause, I think that is it for our work today. Clay, go ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner. Clay Terry, seat expertise in handling, managing produced water. I just wanted to, you mentioned earlier there was an ECMC member, Rick or Rich or someone that was working on a coal bed methane research product. I missed his name. Could you restate that?
Rick Allison.
Allison.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Need contact information, just reach out to Hope and she can provide it.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, with that, I hope everyone has a great weekend and thanks for participating today and look forward to seeing everyone on April 4th. So thank you much.